I guess one of the questions that has been in this inquiry is the justification of the demolition as opposed to refurbishment. What has the department used to justify the demolition as opposed to refurbishment options?
For me. So Homes Victoria, as you know, is the asset owner and manager of all 44 towers, and a core part of our role is to make sure that we have deep knowledge of the current building condition and to make sure we plan for their maintenance. This means we constantly consider right across the portfolio strategies for asset management. In terms of the towers and planning or cost-benefit analysis, it is the case that specific work was undertaken. On the 29th of June 2024, the Attorney-General tabled 12 documents in response to the Legislative Council's resolution on the 15th of November 2023. These documents include reports from approval systems, Ernst & Young, Hayball, Urbis and Super Housing Partnerships. They are some of the many reports that were procured and considered. At the same time, the Attorney-General made a claim of executive privilege in relation to 146 documents in full. The committee may well have seen this document list. I am not able to discuss with you the nature of or contents of these documents. In a related event on 10th of February 2025, Justice Keogh ruled that the 29 Cabinet submission documents are immune from disclosure. He noted that the immunity of the Cabinet submission documents should be maintained pursuant to Section 130 and 1... Sorry, I'm sure you understood that I had to actually read that.
Yeah. So what's the justification for it then?
Well, I'll certainly go through the justification, and Mr. McCurry, who looks after our asset management, I'm sure can go into more detail. As the presentation outlined, there are a number of issues with the properties, not only inherent design and construction flaws, they've reached the end of their design life. They were designed to run for about 50 years.
So if that's the case, can you provide this committee with evidence of that?
I think that statement that I just read to you is my response to that question.
So that's a no.
I can add no further but what I just read in response to that question.
Part of the problem we have is that we haven't been given any evidence by anyone from government as to why these towers should have been demolished as opposed to refurb or other various sort of options. Now, basically you're saying that can't be provided from you. Who can it be provided by then?
My understanding is the Attorney-General is the only one empowered to make that decision.
So the Attorney-General and the Housing Minister can't provide it?
The advice I've got is no.
So you alluded to some documents, I think was from Ernst & Young and PwC, is that correct?
I didn't say PwC, but Ernst & Young, yeah.
Ernst & Young, and they undertook a business case, is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding is, and some of those were done, in fact, most of those were done before I joined Homesvic 2 years ago, but my understanding that one looked at whatever commercial opportunities were available at the bottom of towers.
So can you just repeat that again? I just missed that.
Supermarkets, commercial leasing opportunities, how you would best utilise those sites. That, my understanding, is that the Ernst & Young report focused on that.
Are you able to provide the committee with a copy of that report?
I think those reports I've listed have already been provided.
Yeah, got it here if you want. Yeah. Oh, good, thanks. So, okay. Have you personally cited the cost-benefit analysis of the redevelopment versus the demolition of the tower? So what I'm trying to say is, have you personally seen the document that justifies the demolition of the towers versus retrofitting or other options?
Yes, and again, I've got to be very careful that I don't allude to documents which the Attorney-General's claim privilege on, but yes, I think I've demonstrated there that a variety of reports were developed that form part of the decision-making process by government.
Okay, so you've seen the reports. Apart from demolition, other options that could have been explored may have included things like retrofitting the towers or various versions of that. Is that fair to say?
That would have been considered.
Yeah.
So that would have been considered as one of the options you put against.
Sorry?
That would have been considered. The holding of the towers and retrofitting was one of the options to be considered, yes.
It would have been?
Yes.
Okay. What made it so that it wasn't the preferred option?
Well, if I go back to when we took you around life cycles that we need to go through in terms of replacing. We've got 20 kilometres of sewers that we need to be replaced as we go through those stacks in order to retain them. And if we are to retain them and do a deep retrofit, then we'll need to bring them up closer. I can't say to the National Construction Code, but closer. And that would involve installing lifts and additional paths of egress, because we've got issues in these buildings around fire safety, and we talked to those around paths of egress, lack of fire isolated stairwells, low ceilings and smoke buildup. So there is a combination of factors that you can partially overcome, but all of that comes at a cost. And the question is, if you've got a structure which has got durability issues, then is it prudent to continue to invest in a structure that has got a remaining life of a limited number of years?
Okay, if that is the case then, and the evidence that you have seen in front of you on the report justifies that, why won't the department release that to the public so we can all see it for ourselves?
I can add no further than the statement that I read earlier.
Because as you would have known, there's been a plethora of witnesses come forward and say, look, we can retrofit this, we can do this for a fraction of the price, get a similar outcome, if not better. Wouldn't it just be prudent to say, look, here's our evidence base here, this is the decision that we have come to because of what we have been presented in the reports that you've received? That would completely take away the perception that exists in the community at the moment that these towers can be retrofitted. That would be a fair thing to say, surely.
I think
I'm not asking about balconies, I'm just asking about retrofitting the current building, as many people have spoken about, and
it's part of the retrofit.
Hold on, it's my questions. And the fact of the matter is that information is not being released publicly.
I can't.
So no one can verify one way or another if the claims being made are actually standing up or not. They're not subject to scrutiny.
I cannot add no more to that specific question other than the statement that I have read. We're very happy to answer specific questions about some of the elements which we can go through in detail, but the actual response and what can be provided, I've read that statement from the department.
My time's up. So
to Elgin Street, and what happened in Elgin Street in the two towers there in late 2022 that required the buildings to be evacuated. If you could take the committee through what happened, the evacuation that was required, and take us through what happened in those first two towers.
Given that it happened shortly before I joined House Victoria, I think it's probably best to answer that question.
At Elgin Street, the copper sewer stacks, which have contained inside three risers in the buildings, were failing and leaking raw sewage down the walls of the apartments, down into the electrical substation of the base. That building has got three risers which share electricity and water, and those are not a good combination. The only way to access those risers, so when we showed you around the high-rise towers, we were able to open and see the pipes. Those were contained internally at the back of bathrooms. The only way to actually access those, to repair those pipes, is to partially demolish the bathrooms. In doing so, that would incur a cost of about $8 million per tower to break in and replace those. The towers, when you go through and then retrofitting those back to ensure that we have that separation around risers and making them closer to being code compliant, because under national construction regulation we try to bring those up to standards, and we know we can't, and the question is, can we get reasonable dispensations? Well, we couldn't necessarily get the dispensation, but when you go through the economics of retrofitting those towers versus that of a new build, then the economics for those work out that it's line ball, and you may as well invest in a new build with 60, 70 years of life rather than a remaining tower with 20 years left in the structure. So that could fully code compliant because they've got issues around ceiling heights, thin floor slabs around noise and fire, the ventilation systems were poor, the fire stairwells are narrow and not code compliant. And the question we asked in one of the approval systems is, could we get those to a level of compliance where we could get a certificate of occupancy? And the answer is we would struggle to do that.
So you'd struggle to get a certificate of occupancy because of non-compliance with...
Because of the non-compliance, we would have to work around the current structure to do that. So while we could reconfigure rooms and get the risers correct, that comes at a cost, but certain things around ceiling heights, noise issues, we wouldn't be able to overcome.
Right. And what happened to the residents who were living there? And how long did it... Presumably they had to be moved. How long did that take?
Again, that was just before my time when I arrived. I think we had 2 residents in place. That had been a program that had happened over a number of, a long period of time, over a number of months.
Right, okay.
Of the TRAV documents that were released from approval systems, one of them relating to Melbourne Road, South Yarra, does not conclude that demolition is the only option. In fact, it recommends that a cost-benefit analysis be undertaken to assess the feasibility of upgrading the building. So my question to you is, did that cost analysis ever take place?
I might bow to Martin on that particular instance, but we have already attested to the fact that work was done. But Martin, you might want to add something on that.
Sorry, did you say yes, that cost analysis did take
subject
place?
to being corrected by Martin on that particular tower.
We would have done costs for that tower. We would have done costs based on a set of towers by typology, by sampling, but individual towers, we understand the life cycle of the lifts, the condition of...
Just need an answer, yes or no. With regards to Melbourne Road, South Yarra, did you conduct a cost-benefit analysis? Did it ever take place?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
If so, will you release it? Are you going to make that publicly available to the committee and to the Victorian public?
Okay. I've got a statement that I've already read that I think addresses that question.
So are you saying this cost-benefit analysis falls under executive privilege?
I'm saying that I've read a statement that explains the position of the government.
Can I ask
That's
why
all I
did
can
the
add.
government continue with this demolition without doing the cost-benefit?
Procurement for the next set of the project. So I hope you don't mind. I think we would just have to check on that one.
And you're happy to come back to the committee on that?
I will check what we can release under those conditions, yes.
Thank you. I understand that there was no open tender. Can you confirm that, yes or no?
I can confirm that yes, building communities and I've got to be very careful what I say here, we are currently in negotiations with building communities about extending that existing contract.
So are you saying there was no tender or there was an open tender?
I'm saying that we're looking to extend the existing contract.
What probity checks were undertaken to ensure this decision met procurement and value for money standards?
The specifics we would have to respond, but I'm assured, in fact I know that I'm assured that we had all relevant probity and procurement checks performed.
For example, 5,000 square metres of commercial offices and shop fronts along Gertrude and Brunswick streets at the Atherton Gardens estate in Fitzroy. Can you tell me why the government commissioned detailed commercial real estate analysis for estates across 8 public housing sites, but no studies or cost analysis on feasibility and other viable options like retrofitting?
Okay. I'm pretty certain that I've addressed that in terms of, in fact I have addressed that in terms of the refurbishment we've categorically said here today, and I've under oath as well in a court case and said yes, of course that work was done and explained why we were not at liberty to share that. In terms of the commercial work, that was commissioned some years ago, and I've spoken to the intent now. What work was commissioned a number of years ago, I can't speak to the mind of previous leadership. All I can say is that I'm imagining they were having a look and seeing what were the feasibilities for each site.
Okay, and true potential of these towers, then the impact on the people who live in them.
Oh, I'm sorry, I categorically reject that that's the case.
When she spoke about the open tender, you answered, we're extending the current contract, when the truth is, the fact is that there was no open tender.
There was a full-blown, and obviously the original ground lease model procurement was before my time, but it is certainly deemed the most commercially viable and sensible way would be to continue under the current agreement. We're in construction right now on the next phase for the ground lease model. And it's
Was there an open tender? That's the question. It's a yes
the
or
original
no.
contract, absolutely.
Original contract. Okay. In terms of the EY business case and the reasons it's not being released, is it because there's advice within that the report that the government's ignoring and not following?
My understanding is the Ernst & Young work was one of the documents that were tabled.
Is there costs in the reports that you're withholding that have not been disclosed?
I would have to check on some of the specifics of that before I categorically answer that, but to the best of my knowledge, no, I think that report was released in full, but can you please, we can check on that one.
One of the reasons that the government's advisors believe that the towers are an earthquake risk, and this is one of the reasons that you are taking the steps that you're taking. However, it's going to be 26 years before the project is finished. So how do you justify, if that is the truth and that is factual, how do you justify having Victorian residents in an earthquake risk for 26 years?
I think whether you see our submission, the Secretary's presentation
That's right, you
today...
can answer now, yeah.
Sorry, beg your
You
pardon?
can answer it now.
Well, sorry, what I was about to say is that whether it's in that presentation, our submission, we've been extremely clear about all of the factors that were taken into account in terms of the decision, and seismic and the lack of compliance with today's seismic standards is certainly one of the factors that we've needed to take into account. I would just say, just to avoid any sort of panic for anybody, because we really don't want to do that, is that the homes, the apartments are, as in terms of that, with notwithstanding what Martin talked about in terms of spalling, what have you, they're as safe today as the day they were built. So
The question is yes or no.
you'll have to repeat the question.
Does the government have a list of all the towers and why they need to be knocked down in the stated timeframes?
Of course, we have a list of the towers, the order in which we'll do the redevelopment. The government has announced the first.
Yes or no?
The government has announced the first two tranches. So the answer to your question is the entire program has not been developed over the 28 years in terms of exactly which towers. That's being developed as each tranche is announced.
You mentioned about the of keeping communities together. In terms of the documents that aren't being released, I just want to, we've been ordered to do this by the Parliament. It's the use of public land. It's publicly owned. We're using public money. Do you believe that the public have a right to transparency from the government with this?
I think the best way that I can answer that question is it's not our place as public servants to comment on the policy of the government or the actions of the government. It's my job there to read that statement today. I couldn't have been any clearer in terms of the role and flexibility that we have.
Report that a decision was made and there are no documents, end quote, relating to the decision to demolish the towers at North Melbourne and Flemington. So I'll ask again, do you maintain your claim that you have documents that look at cost-benefit analysis of retrofitting all of the towers?
I maintain the statement that I read, and the answer is yes, that work was done. And yes, I have read the very limited purview that I have in terms of being able to share that work.
So were the government lawyers lying?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Were the government lawyers lying based on what they've said?
No, I think you'll probably find they were referring to the Human Rights Charter court case in terms of whether there was a separate documentation of the decision made versus what was encased in the cabinet process. I think that might be the decision that they're referring to.
Right.
The modelling, that despite the modelling being around $9,000 per square metre, that this is increasing, even almost doubling to around $15,000. With the increase in cost, does the business case actually stack up?
Look, I've got to be very careful at the moment because we're in procurement for Carlton, which is probably the best indicator of what the current rates are. All I can say at this stage is we're not seeing any deviation from that current rate. I'm not Nostradamus. I don't know what the rates will be in years to come. But we've gone through that's an increase of sort of 35% over the last 3 to 4 years. So we're assuming a more normal increase, but again, I've got to be very careful because we're out there in procurement at the moment, and I don't want to be tipping my hand in terms of what budgets are to builders, but that 10,000 a square metre is around about the mark.
Okay, so, but given that we are a state where the costs of building materials are significant and not easy to access, wouldn't it be a better case, doesn't that provide a better case for refurbishment over a rebuild at this point in time?
No, typically refurbishment costs, renovation costs, and anybody who's done any renovation work themselves will know it can be 2 to 3 times the cost.
So just to sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Newport, but I am a person that's had to do renovations many times, and I wouldn't agree with you at all. And if we look at some of the transactions that have taken place in other nations, that isn't what the data is showing around the world. So we have, for instance, and we've heard about Switzerland, Belgium, France, all of them doing refurbishments in their buildings. Now I know that Mr. McCurry, you mentioned that the pipeline area for, say, sewage and water was hard to access because it was behind the bathroom. We have visited the towers, and we've actually seen that the way that is accessed was actually thought through by the architects, and there's actually a cupboard that allows access to these pipes. So it's not that they're not accessible.
So Ms. Evans, I think I was there when I showed you around. We accepted the sewer stacks through that little cupboard.
Yes.
You have to then replace 2.7 metres high, and that was only applied to the bathroom. There also is a sewer stack for the kitchen. When we talk about international precedents, and we go to international precedents around similar technologies that
much older homes, and they are, and it's all to do with maintenance. Now these homes, the government. I'm sorry, it's my turn, and you have had your turn. The government has been negligent. This is the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing. Now, in terms of fairness, how fair is it to actually neglect these buildings and to not repair them and to not have the maintenance so that we can justify a rebuild? To me, that doesn't sound like it is actually fairness. It doesn't sound like it is looking after families, and it certainly doesn't sound. It's very difficult to understand the perspective of housing when we've talked about what vandalism on lifts as being one of the reasons why we need to have a new building with new lifts. Vandalism is going to occur in new builds as well. So this is not a cost that you can actually ignore.
If I can answer your questions, and I'll go back and I'll ignore the part about vandalism and lifts because that was a question about OPEX, not about capital. The maintenance regime that we have, we service our lifts fortnightly. We do our annual checks in line with our manufacturer recommendations on all our gas boiler systems. Our automatic doors are done 2 monthly. Our exit lighting is done 2 monthly. We go through and we check our sewer stack 6 weekly. The issues that you face is not an issue of maintenance. You face an issue with these towers around age and the fact that they have been in use for 50 years.
Yes.
We're actually maintaining the centralised plant. We've updated all lifts. We've updated all the equipment. And to say this is a function of maintenance, I think that's a sophism.
No, I don't think so. I think that it's actually really unreasonable to think that you can't build an extra lift somewhere because you need to have something that's big enough to be able to have a stretcher on. It could be an external lift. There's plenty of buildings around the world with external lifts. To say that that we need to look at the costs, and one of the costs is because of vandalism on a lift, to me, you're not. The thing is, you're not providing the transparency of the documents, and so all we can go on is that you're saying it is more cost effective for us to rebuild than it is to refurbish, and we're not seeing this, and we're certainly not hearing that from people in the industry, that building and construction and architects are saying it is possible, and the thing that gets me is you are the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing, and we are putting a whole lot of people at risk of housing. Has the government thought about the increase of migration into this state and taken that into consideration with the development of these houses, given that you are relocating people, and without us having an increase of our housing and a substantial increase of housing being built at a rapid rate, we are going to have an increase of homelessness.
how is this department preparing to help the people of Victoria with homes when it is not building them rapidly and is at the moment taking people out of their homes and relocating them, and there are people that don't want to leave? How are you actually taking in the consideration of our current homeless situation in Victoria? Who would like to answer that?
I will.
But in reality, the construction is not keeping up with the need. And we have the lowest public housing in the whole of Australia in terms of what we can access for people. So my question is, I have here that Homes Victoria has been going directly to real estate agents and builders, and they have been prepared to pay a 10% increase on the rent year on year. So how many houses have you secured this way, and have you modelled what impact this is going to have on the private sector rental and on the cost of, affordable housing per se?
You can finish the...
I'll address some of those. Look, those claims being made with regards to that somehow we're paying overs, I think my Deputy CEO has absolutely addressed those in terms of we're not making those sorts of promises. We're not able to make those sorts of promises. We can only pay the prevailing market rate, which is ultimately checked and decided by the value.
So just if that's the case, how long do you know how this whole process will take? If it's 30 years, 40 years, then how do you know that if you haven't... You said you only do it tranche by tranche. How do you know how long it's going to take all up?
We know how long it takes to do relocations. We know how long it takes to do deconstruction or demolition, and we know how long it takes to build them. This is not the first time that we've done this. Obviously the ground lease model is a classic example. We've got many years of experience of doing this, not on these particular sites, but the ground lease models are great examples of stuff that we have already done. So we do know that it's typically a 7 to 8 year from very first announcement to doors being opened.
Thank you. My last little bit, Tetris Capital, who are they?
Okay.
And I can't talk about, we've done an expression.
Yeah, so it's so frustrating that you can barely talk about anything because we're here to, and I'm just putting it out there. We're trying to get answers, and I appreciate to know.
To clarify, Carlton is an open tender process. North Melbourne will be an open tender. The issue about Flemington is the augmentation of the site and to keep the site curtailed to one provider because it's working for that site.
That's what Mr. Newport said that he can't answer. And I just acknowledging that it is very frustrating that there's very little information that we...
All I'm saying is when you're in a live procurement mode, there is no way in the world that we can be talking about something that's out there in the market right now. Carlton has closed, and obviously I haven't seen the tender box with
Analysis.
No, absolutely not. I think my statement, the department statement, stands for itself.
Do you think that the public have a right to know the cost analysis benefits? And because this is public land, it is being public land. It belongs to the people, not just to the individuals from the departments who make the decisions and to the executive directors, with all due respect. It is public land. Do you think people are entitled to know the cost benefits of refurbishing versus a complete demolition and reconstruction?
I guess I'd just reiterate, we've come to the committee to answer the questions within the parameters that we work in the public service, and we are not able to provide the information, and we need to be bound by the rules just like you do on the other side of the table as well. So
understand. Appreciate that. So then this is the last thing, right? These towers are actually the largest assets that this state owns. Right? This is the last of our large assets in the state of Victoria. We don't have a lot left. So when this is sold off, there's not a lot left in Victoria. Right? And we understand there's a lot of debt. But do you think the taxpayer deserves to know this information, given that this is our largest or one of our largest assets left in the state?
Nothing's been sold.
I
understand you're being told you can't, but do you think they should have that right?
Let me probably address the premise of that question. And the first premise is that land is being sold. And again, I would just caution that I'm only able to comment upon government decisions that have already been made. But out of the 5 towers that are being delivered, in all instances, they'll remain in the ownership of Homes Victoria. 2 run as public, 3 run as ground lease model, but all will be owned. I'm not able to comment on anything else, so I think the premise that they're being sold, I would also point out that they represent about 10%, a not insignificant number, but represents about 10% of the asset base of homes in Victoria. So it is not, I don't necessarily accept that it's the largest asset base that we have. We have $37 billion in